Hello and welcome back to Pandemic Playground with Dave. So today we are playing around with hover engines. Alright, so today's experiment is a bit of a mod spotlight at the same time, and that's experimenting with hover engines. So the hover engines mod created by Takeshi, check it out in the Steam Workshop, and they created a nice hover engine for hovercrafts. So if you saw my previous episode of making hovercrafts using wheels and suspensions flipped sideways, those worked out okay, but having some true hover engines such as these will be a lot better and a lot cooler, to be honest. So yeah, they created a pretty cool mod where we can use some thrusters, if anything, to maneuver our hovercraft where it floats off from the ground. So let's take a quick spotlight look at what they have. Alright, so down on my toolbar we have the several selections of the hover engines that are provided with this mod. So one, we have the hover engine small for the military grade, where you have 1x1s, 3x3s on here. And of course there are the armored ones, which is pretty much housed into a box or a cube, so it gives that protection in that sense. And again, it has the 1x1 and a 3x3 for our purposes there. And then we have the civilian class grades, which is this one here, which is a little more of a honeycomb look to it, which you do again have a 1x1 and a 3x3, which a 3x3 application would be pretty interesting. Maybe I'll build something with that sooner or later. But also they do come with the civilian armored class hover engine as well. So those are the four selections that are here. And the main difference between the two, from what I read, the military grade is a little stronger than the civilian graded hover engines. So that's the only difference. I haven't tested them out yet, but that's what I got from that. But today is playing around with the hovercraft itself. So I just used the military grade for now, and if I plop them onto this little buggy rover and put it on the bottom on each corner, just to kind of bounce it out. And I did use a vector thrusting script to kind of maneuver left, right, forward, backwards, and all that sense there. So let's take a quick look at the hover engines themselves. So the hover engines themselves do have a thrust override, which is cool. So you can set things up with timers and things like that if necessary. You do have the altitude minimums, you have your altitude ranges, and your altitude regulation distance. And aside from that, you have to align gravity, experts apply force to center, experts push only, and you can change the colors of your hover engines for any look purposes, which is a really cool addition to that. So looking at these settings, you can play around with it. Things like altitude minimum, you can set it for the height of the hover engines. As you see, my buggy is going a little taller or flying a little higher because I'm messing around with this here. So things like that, but for the most part I'm going to leave as default. So we have a nice little test going on and range going on. So how well does the hover engines work? I think they work really well, as you see here, and in conjunction with a vector thrust on top or on the sides, we can easily maneuver these things left and right really quickly, which is pretty cool. So what I've done on this little rover here is basically the 4 hover engines, a lot of small batteries. I am in creative mode, so my battery's not going to run out. So you probably do need more batteries than this eventually, especially with 2 thrusters on top. And it has 2 gyroscopes, so I use 2 so I can put one on override so I can spin it and turn it a lot faster if it flips over. But with 2, currently I put them both at 50%. One of the biggest reasons why I put 2 is design purposes as well, but you could probably live with 1 in some senses. And of course we have a programming block here so that we can control the vector thrusting as well. And the one I use is, of course, is Vector Thrust 2 for the most part. So I'll leave a link in the description below for both the hover engine mod, and also the Vector Thrust 2 if you haven't checked that out just yet. So yeah, we can go fairly fast. I think we can hit the 100 mark pretty quickly and not cause any issues. So we're gonna start doing that and move on forward. We're getting close to the 100 mark there. And yeah, see, it just wobbles just a tiny bit, but we can easily move left and right, no issues, and just keep on going from there. So it's a nice smooth ride. We can increase the height if we want to. We're a little scared of hitting the bottom and breaking things, but for the most part, this height, this 1 meter height, looks to work out pretty well. So no complaints there. So absolutely love this mod. It's a pretty cool way to have hovercrafts for any future builds. But I did want to go in and test certain things. One, can we ramp this guy? Alright, so I made a very basic ramp using the slope blocks here, which are the light armor slope 2x1x1 base associated with the slopes 2x1x1 tips. So it has a nice little elevation, not a steep elevation upward, so it gives a bit of a smooth little ramp. So it is a bit of a tiny ramp, so hopefully I don't miss here. Ideally, I probably do want to increase the height of my engines just a tiny bit. Let's just say 2 meters, just to give it a little more range. So what I'm gonna do here is basically hopefully target the too wide ramp and see what happens. Hopefully I fly over it, or will I crash? I'm not sure. So I'm gonna go, it's pretty fast, close to 100 mark. Oh, and it kind of ramped over it without any issues. So I didn't crash into it, which is a good thing. It did something weird, so I bounced before I hit the ramp initially. So it may have been because of these little craters. And these little craters are actually caused by that thing over there, which was my previous experiment with a whole bunch of them loaded on here, and I just let them free range. But that thing that's kind of causes some problems here. But anyways, let's do a shorter range instead of going too fast and see what happens when we get close to it. Okay, so it starts to ramp up closer to the ramp and not on the ramp itself, which makes sense. So it does detect it, so that's pretty cool. So you can ramp this thing, which is perfect. So I could definitely play around with that a lot more, but that kind of passes the test as a ramp. So I had a few ideas in mind as well, and one of them would be to put a hover engine in front and run into a wall, and well, at least attempt to run into a wall and see if it will stop me from doing so. So let's just put that to the test right now. Alright, so I loaded up a few here, and as you see, I just put in the hover engines in the front, and when we're in the system here, it actually counts as backwards, so it's pretty cool. So what I did is pretty much increase the altitude minimum to 10 meters, altitude range to 5 meters. I changed the altitude regulation distance to 1 meter to make it a kind of a hard spring in that sense. Alright, so we should be able to pick up close to 100 meters per second, maybe a little less. And for this initial test, I am going to put on my thrusters and go forward as much as possible, and actually not stop the thrusters and see what happens. So we are gonna back up just a tiny bit and start to pick up some speed. So, and here we go. So we should pick up probably 70 meters per second, if anything, and let's see what happens. Alright, so that was kind of interesting. So it looked like it just started to ramp upwards for a tiny bit, and then it ran up to the top of the wall right around here. And of course, they didn't break anything because it's such a small grid. But that didn't stop it much at all. It just bounced it upwards a little bit. So let's see what happens if we decide to shut off the thrusters. So to do that, we can just hit 2 on our 2 bar, so it'll stop it. Alright, so for example, if I go forward from here, hit 20 meters per second or 30, hit 2 for off, I'm still going forward and it's drifting a bit. And of course, I'm losing some speed, but not too much. But that should be alright. So we're going to back this guy up and just try test number 2. And this time, what we're going to do is actually turn off the thrusters when we hit close to the wall. And then we'll drift a little bit too. So we're going to start that right now. Go forward. We can stop it at right around here. We'll turn it off and see what happens. Ooh, it goes up and it pushed us backwards. So interesting that we can do that. So it looks like we can go forward and it just pushes us back. So depending on the speed, it will allow us to stop or get a break from hitting a wall. So of course slow speeds work, but let's kind of see what that speed's gonna be. So at about 50 here, 50 meters per second seems to be a safe number. So that kind of worked out well in terms of 50 meters per second as a slower speed. I think if we go a little bit faster, what's gonna happen? I'm not too sure. So let's see if we can pick up much more speed. And we're about 70, 80. And we flew over the wall. Was not expecting that to happen. It may be because of the way I have it set up. And that might be the altitude range, maybe? We'll just lower that instead. Alright, so that was 80 meters per second before I hit stop, so I may hit like 79, 78, if anything. But that was interesting how it just flew over the wall. So we're going to test it again, but this time we're going to remove that one piece of it, or lower that one piece of it. So we're going to pick up the same speed. Let's see if we can get 100 meters per second, which I think we should at this range. And we're going to hit the stop. Oh, no, we're not going to hit 80. And again, we're flying right over it. So, interesting that it's doing that. It's pretty cool though. But this, I am using half block, so I'm not sure if that's causing any issues there with it. So, I hope not, but it was an interesting test. I could probably test it out with smaller grid blocks, but we'll leave it as that for now. So I do want to test out maximum speed, 100 meters per second. So let me just back it up a little bit more. And then go forward and see if it's gonna do its magic here. So we're gonna go as fast as possible. Right into it, close to 100 meters per second. I hope we hit 100. And it looks like we will. And then we're gonna stop our thrusters. And whoop, almost hit the wall. But definitely flew right over it. So that's interesting that it's doing that. And it's possibly because I'm using these half blocks here. So maybe I should test it out with some regular blocks, which I don't think is going to make a huge difference, but let's take a look and find out. Alright, so we have a wall here that's regular armor blocks right in front of the half block. So we'll take this guy again, go for a quick test. So it is interesting that the hover engines in the front will kind of slow you down and stop you, which is good at slow speeds. At fast speeds, for some reason, we're flying over the block or over the wall. And that could be because of the front hover engines down the bottom, or a combination of both. So we'll see what's going to happen this time as we're going towards the wall. So now we're using full blocks, so hopefully that makes a bit of a change. So we're going to stop our thrusters now, and oof. Oof. So it was attempting to fly over the wall once again, but it was too fast for it to go upwards and decided to crash into the wall itself. Alright, so it kind of works. Maybe we built it slightly different. It might be able to push us backwards, but of course we tried in slow speeds. That definitely worked out pretty well. So you can kind of use that to brace yourself in front, but of course it can cause a bit of issues with wobble and things like that too. So one more thing to test out that I had in mind, and that is this guy here. So it's the same buggy hovercraft here. The only difference is that I added forward hover engines back here, and I wanted to test out if we can get any momentum going forward using subgrids. So what I have here is basically a hinge with a few blocks here. So 4 blocks going across, some on top just to stabilize it a little bit, which it honestly doesn't do too much. And this sensor, the hover engines will sensor these blocks and push us forward. So I wasn't sure if that's going to happen or not, so I wanted to put that to the test. So to test this out, what I initially did was put on my toolbar on this hinge to detach and attach really quickly using my 3 and 4, and I just hit 3 and 4 back and forth to see if it pushes us forward, which it kind of did, but it requires a lot of button pressing. So I decided to put on timer blocks, where timer block 1 is gonna detach and also let timer block 2 activate, which is gonna attach. So on the 2 block here, we have this timer block, which is gonna trigger, and it's gonna do exactly what I said before. And this one's to stop it, so we can stop the momentum going forward. So let's see if it works. I mean, from what I've tested out before, it looked like it worked out pretty well by pressing the buttons. But if we put on a timer block, will we have forward momentum? So we can turn off our thrusters so we don't get that forward momentum from it, as you see here. So I'm gonna hit the timer block in 3, 2, 1. Oh, so it's making a weird noise, and it is. Oh, there you go. We got forward momentum. So I just played around with it a bit, and we got forward momentum, and it looks like we're flipping over. So that's not a really good thing. So it freaked out once I triggered the timing block. It just went. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's a bit of a humming noise in the back end of it, and it just decided to move once I hit it again. So what if we left it with the thrusters on this time? So we turn the thrusters on here, and then we trigger our timing block in 3, 2, 1. It's making a humming noise once again, but I pressed it again and it starts to move. Okay, that's interesting. And we are getting some momentum, but we also are flipping over. So that's not a good thing. So it might be a settings issue here, where we're kind of flipping over because of the hover engines. Whoop, that's not what I wanted. Okay, so we might be flipping over because of the front ones here. So let's get rid of these guys. Oop, got rid of the light. Get rid of those front ones, and we can adjust the forward ones with a altitude range. Just lower that to that here, and we can just do 1 meter here. We can do hard in terms of the distance, so we should be okay. All right, so let's test that in again in 3, 2, 1. Trigger. Okay, it's freaking out, as you see there. I'm gonna hit it again. There we go. Hit it several times and it's going. It's going, but it is also freaking out. So maybe based on the design or a different design, we could probably get it to work better and have it give us momentum going forward. So we technically wouldn't need the vector thrust or any thrusters in that sense, and just use the hover engine to detect the subgrid to move forward. I mean, absolutely pointless in some ways. You're better off using the thruster or any other type of way of doing it. But that definitely not an ideal thing to do. But it's a interesting test to see if it will go forward, detecting a subgrid. Alright, so that was a fun little test, and of course, if you made it to the end of this video, please hit that thumbs up, like the video. If you haven't done so yet, consider subscribing to the channel. Feel free to drop a comment down below. And of course, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.